about his life in San Francisco that I had never heard before. And you can learn that too if you go to the Facebook memorial page for him. Daryl recorded that and posted it up there. And you can also hear my formal remarks because we recorded the church service in Albuquerque. Having done that once, I don't care to do it again. So I just wanted to really more open it up for any of you who want to say something. I know that a couple of you have told me that you would, and I know that some of you have known Peter and my parents for a very long time, almost as long as I have. And I would like to hear stories that you have to tell or memories that you have. I have found that to be just so incredibly enriching in my life. And I would appreciate hearing some of yours. I will tell one about my mom, which I think shows her commitment to social justice, which was a big part of who she was. When she was in college, Peter wrote all this down in a multi-page appreciation. I'm just going to condense this part down. When she was in college, she joined a campus group, student group, for working against segregation. This was in the late 40s, so segregation was still, the law of the land everywhere, or almost everywhere. And they had an African American, I don't know who he was. He was just the speaker in Peter's writing of this, who came and talked to their group, and they decided that they needed to do something, so they went downtown. I'm thinking, based on the timing of this, that this was St. Joseph, Missouri, rather than Albuquerque, New Mexico. My mom went to junior college in St. Joseph, where she grew up, before going off to the University of New Mexico. It could be either. So a bunch of the students and the speaker went to this restaurant, which was, of course, segregated. And they were urged to leave several times, and finally the chef and some of the people in the back room came out and forcibly evicted them, and it turned into a brawl. And the speaker and my mom both ended up in the hospital as a result of that. But that burned into her mind just how unfair segregation was. And for the rest of her life, she was active against that in a variety of ways. Helping to found the Maine chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union, for example, and serving as its first secretary. And that's one of the things that I remember growing up with. She wasn't that way didactically saying, this is wrong so much, as living it out. And that's, I think, one of the greatest gifts that she's given to me, and one of the things that I'm most appreciative of for her. Just with the courage that it took in the late 1940s to do that, and the commitment. So, if anybody else would like to come up, and I would hope all of you would come up, but I know some of you, like my wife Linda, do not speak in public. End of discussion. Thank you very much. If anybody wants to come up and say some words, I would love to hear something that you have to say. Do you want to come here?
Sure.
Melanie, now Collins, who was pleased when I knew her.
That's right. Howdy! That's how Peter would greet at a party or whatever. So hopefully I can hold it together. This might go all over the place, but I want to tell you a little bit about Peter in the past and Peter recently. I know that Peter would not want to overshadow his mom, and this was a big deal to have a service for his mom, and but we don't always get what we want, right? So anyway, I wanted to thank Jean and Stuart for having such a wonderful child who was a light to all of our lives. I'm Melanie Collins. we knew Peter first was introduced to him by my former husband, Quinn Collins, when he was his best friend. And then he was the best man at our wedding. But we didn't have champagne at the wedding. So Peter had to deal with that. So how do you have a toast with no champagne? So Peter got some pieces of toast, and he went around and he said, toast, 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 So people loved that. So he handled that great. It's like, we don't have the money for champagne, Peter, what are we gonna do? So he took care of it. He was over the top in his acts of kindness. When we were moving out of Berkeley, California, back to the East Coast, he came over so we could get our security deposit back, and he hand washed the floor with Murphy's oil soap. We got our security deposit back, so he was that worked out well for what he planned. He called. He also did none out of the over the top acts of kindness as well. He called people on their birthday. Most of the people, probably many of the people in this room, he would call on your birthday. Sometimes he was the only one that called, or wished me a happy birthday. I mean, I'll do to my kids when they remembered, And so we talked every day. As a nurse, he would often call me every day as a friend, but then as a nurse, I knew quite a few details about him. One time, recently, a friend of mine who's a nurse said, is he kind of a little much, a little overbearing? And I said, Peter has never ever been a burden to me. We share things, and it's a rare relationship when you can tell somebody anything, and it's going to be okay. They're not going to judge you. So he was very accepting, and I think that's the thing that people loved about Peter the most. He was just accepting of you, who you were, where you were, and it didn't matter, even if you didn't agree with him on politics or something like that. He might have something to say about that, but he was just very accepting of everybody. So that's a rare friendship, and so I wanted to speak a little bit about how Peter died, because I was on the phone with him when he passed, because we did talk every day, and he really died of toxic stress. So what that is when he had trouble with his housing like 17 years ago, 18 years ago, where he was renting, subletting from somebody, and he was paying the rent, but that person wasn't paying it to the landlord, so he got evicted. And he was very afraid of becoming homeless. And then after that, 15 years ago, he I think was struggling with that toxic stress, and he had fibromyalgia but didn't know it. So he left a job that he loved. He was working as a paralegal, and they loved him. He did a great job, and he loved that job. He didn't know what was wrong. So then his father was ill with cancer, and he came to live at the house in Albuquerque and help take care of his dad. And his dad passed, and then he was going to move back to San Francisco, and then his mom wasn't so well, and she needed care, so he stayed with her. And then she ended up in a nursing home, and then she passed. So he was dealing with all these different sad things. He actually passed on the 12th anniversary of his father's death. And then the third anniversary, and it will get happier, guys, it will get happier, I promise. The third anniversary of the last time he saw his mom was coming up on the Monday after he passed. So we had these 3 anniversaries in a week's time. So it was a particularly stressful week for him. He had bronchitis, which he had been diagnosed with, and he was on steroids. So then it gets happier because the steroids really did make his coughing go away, and he was on the upswing. He had a lot of asthma, and that was doing well. And I didn't realize it as a nurse, I probably should have, but I think he was having something called adrenal storm, which happens sometimes when you take steroids many times in your life, or and you're not as well as you could be. With the different things that were going on for Peter, that was likely what happened, because when he was taking it, he was feeling terrible. And he had been on bed rest because he was just feeling so terrible. So in the end, I think what happened is he died of a pulmonary embolism, which wouldn't have been something that he could have been saved from if somebody had been right there at his doorstep. But the good news is this: and the other thing about like his history in recent time was that he was able to buy out his share of the house from his brothers just before he passed, so he had his own home, and he was very, very pleased about that. The day he died, we had spoken 3 times. He told me he had talked with David, and he was very happy about that, about their dad, and really come to grips with that whole thing, and also with the passing of his mom and the last time he saw her, because he saw her and he kissed her on the cheek and said goodbye, and she was not upset, and he was not upset, and she passed peacefully in her sleep after thanking everyone that took care of her at the place that she stayed, and so he had come to grips with that as well. But he had ordered a pizza. He had his favorite dessert in the fridge. He had the classical music on, and he was getting ready for really, Peter liked to pamper himself, and especially when he wasn't feeling well, so he was going to do it up. And he had all the things in place. We were going to have a nice long conversation, and I started telling him a story about my chickens. Because when a chicken lays an egg, they love to let you know about it. And so he said, really? He said, did they do that when they're laying the egg or after? And I said, oh, definitely after. When they're laying an egg, a chicken will be very, quiet and studious. They're really serious business. But after they've laid an egg, they're like, I laid an egg, I laid that, did you see it? I laid that egg right there. They're just like all over it, and he's laughing and I'm laughing. And then all of a sudden he said, oh no. So something was wrong, and I thought he had left a burner on and left a napkin on the burner, and it caught on fire. So his voice got distant for a moment, and then he came back to the phone and he said, I just feel weak and dizzy. And so I said, okay, well, take a few deep breaths, and so he did, and I said, well, how about now, Peter? And he said, well, kind of the same, he said, I'll call you back. And I said, Peter, I'd rather stay on the phone with you. I'd rather, hang with you here. And so I said, I think your blood pressure's dropped for some reason. And so I said, take another breath, deep breath. He did. And I said, he said, so I'll take my blood pressure when I get up, and I'll let you know what it is. He often did that. And so I said, take another deep breath, and he did. And then I asked him to take his pulse for me, and he did. And he said, it's slow. So, all right, take another deep breath. It's going to come back. He's just, getting dizzy. And so then I said, how about now? And he said, gone. So I said, well, where are you taking your pulse? He said, chest. I said, can you take it in your wrist? And he said, no. So, and that was the last he said. And then he was breathing nice and deeply. I said, Peter, if you don't, can you answer me? If you can't answer me, I'm calling 911. And I asked him a couple times, and he wasn't able to answer. So before he stopped breathing, I called 911, and he was not afraid. He was very, very peaceful. He was not in any pain at all. And that's very typical for somebody who passes from a pulmonary embolism. And so they did get to him, took hours, but they did get to him, but they said that nothing would have changed. Had anybody come quicker than that. So So, and Peter's health had actually started to improve. And we were looking forward to all kinds of big plans. But you know, it wasn't to be, but he died with a friend there. He died happy, laughing. He died with you know, a pizza on the way and his favorite dessert. Looking forward to that, listening to some favorite music. So, you know, it was painless, it was peaceful, it was, you know, I couldn't ask for a better death myself. You know, Peter did not want to be sick, and he did not want to be in the hospital alone, and he did not want to be in pain, and he had none of that. So I'm very thankful, I'm very honored that I was able to be there for him. And now I'm going to talk just briefly about some of the more fun stuff about Peter. Peter was a performance artist, and I never really thought of him that way until somebody just mentioned it who didn't know Peter. And I was showing her some pictures on my phone, and she's like, oh, he was a performance artist. And I'm like, yes, that is what he was. So if you look around on the pictures, there's some of Peter in a copper-colored hat that's real shiny. He really came into this. I mean, it started really when he was a band member in Slaves of Liberty in high school, and he was the antics champion on stage. So he would ride around a tricycle, and a punk rock band, you know, so you got to throw trash out at people, and you know, and it was shut down. You know, they didn't even get to finish. I think they were partway through their first song, and they were shut down by the school administration. They're like, none of this, you know. So like, that's when it started. But the copper hat pictures is from the Penny Parade, which is one of his ideas, and he collected change. Everybody collected change, and then you'd go around the streets of San Francisco, and you'd spare change people. But instead of asking them for spare change with your hand open, we had spare change, and we'd say, spare change, spare change. Would you like some spare change? And people were like, wait, no, okay. You know, they were like, no, save that for someone else. We had a hard time getting rid of all of our spare change because people are just so, you know, just flipping it. And he did something called, he did a protest of the movie Fantasia, and it really what that was just, it's just for fun. And the group that supposedly was putting this on, it was a mock thing that got picked up by the newspaper and then it printed all over the world, this protest of the movie Fantasia. So the lead group in it was Spasm. That stood for Serious Parents Against Scary Movies. So Fantasia is very scary, as you know, for children. And there were different people were protesting, and the hippos were making fun of the oversized people, and the water wasting mouse. You know, this is California, we need our water, and Mickey is just like spreading buckets everywhere, and that's not appropriate. So he's just really making fun of people who take issue with everything, you know, which is just so Peter to do that. I visited him in Albuquerque, and he took me to several spots, and the clothes I'm wearing, actually, I bought while I was there. He took me to a very special place that he loved, and he thought I would love too, and he enjoyed me. Like 2 hours I would be there, and I was trying on things, and he loved it. Even though it was kind of pushing his physical limits, he thought it was great. But he took me to the Candy Lady, who was one of his favorite people, of course, because Peter loves sweets. And she made very good ones. And people in the store recognized it. Well, how would you not recognize Peter? You know? And like, how do you sum up a life like Peter's, or any life in a few minutes? But a life like Peter's is just impossible. So I'm almost finished, but I'm only hitting the highlights. But they said, they took me aside and they said, I don't know anyone who ever took better care of a parent than Peter took of his mom. And then when I was there, the delivery, he ordered food from a co-op. He actually ate a lot more healthily than I would have thought. And he had a special organic food delivered sometimes from the co-op. And this particular day, the manager or the owner of the place came, And I was outside raking and doing stuff, and he comes up with the order, and he said, oh, you know Peter? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm a friend. And he goes, oh my gosh, I'm so glad. I took this delivery this day on purpose. It's way out of the way for them to come to where Peter lived. But he said, Peter's one of my favorite people. And he would say, you know, he took care of his mother just so amazingly. And that's what you'd hear. That's who he was. So I'm going to end with a dance, which is the Peter Doty dance move, and I hope I don't hurt myself. So I just to wrap it up, I think it's really important things that I learned from Peter, and what I told this nurse when she asked if he was, you know, like kind of difficult, is that, you know, I learned so much in talking to Peter and being able to tell him whatever. But call your friends and loved ones. Don't be afraid to express yourself and make people laugh. And die laughing. It's a good way to go. So here is the Peter Doty dance move, which comes from high school. Oh, also he was a very proud member of the Potawatomi and Menominee tribe on his mom's side. So David, of course, would have that heritage as well. And he actually, I don't think he's very proud of the picture, but this is his ID. And if you want to look at it up close, you can. But yeah, so I asked him if I could take a picture of that when I was visiting him. So here is the Peter Doty. And I might crack my tooth because it's quite vigorous. So what music should we picture?
King of the Road.
What?
King of the Road.
Oh, well, it's going to be a little more upright.
Surfing
But, you know, I
bird.
think we
Twisted
should
Shout.
do a little song. And I wish I had more to say about Jean, who is a very, very lovely person. I love very much.
Peter's favorite was White Rabbit, but I don't know.
Yeah,
how
that would be
dances
like
are.
so 6 days, are you talking about 6 days on the road?
Yeah, I'm talking about his favorite karaoke with
King of the Road, yeah. He also did 6 days on the road. No, we're going to make it on tonight, yeah. So, okay, well, I'm just gonna do it. I don't know, maybe somebody can give me a beat or something.
Little Richard or something.
Say it again?
Little Richard.
Okay, so what's a Little Richard song? Maybe you know.
Good golly.
Jolly Smile.
Good golly, Miss Molly. It's explosive and it's very Peter. So it's in that first move, the hand move for that. So, you know, and I don't mean to make it so that nobody can top that. But that's not my intention at all. I'm actually, I'm trying, well, I'm trying to break the ice. So like, if I can do this, you guys can tell stories too. So the first part of that move is the hands. So that's, okay. Now that's from a show called Zoom. ZOON, box 354, Boston, Mass. 02134. Send it to Zoom. So whenever I do a Zoom call with Peter, he loved this because nobody had heard of that for many years. So whenever we do a Zoom call, I'd say, Peter, we're going to do, or we didn't do many, but I'm going to do a Zoom call with you. 02134. Send it to Zoom. So Bernadette did the hands. And then Peter threw in he did that part. So it was partly original, you know. So anyway, it takes practice to do that, believe me. And my age shows as I'm very out of breath. So anyway, you guys, I hope somebody else will come up and tell stuff, and you know, feel free to. And anybody want to come up next? Come on, Jamie.
Thanks, Mal.
Oh.
Good representation of Peter's dance. I was thinking maybe Manamana.
Oh.
Manamana. He loved that one. We used to play that at the house a lot. The other one maybe Surfing Bird.
Yeah. Or Wipeout.
So I'm Jamie Wagner, for those who don't know me. Jean Doty was my godmother. And my mother and, well, Jean and Stu were my godparents. And my parents were Peter's godparents. So Peter and I always called each other godbrothers. Even though we were not particularly religious, either of us, but we did go to church. Same church where I think Dewey goes now, with Emily, right? To St. James? Yeah. And I was telling Dwight the other night that when Peter and I would be at church, we'd sit next to each other and be quite irreverent, which is, I guess, not very appropriate in church, but it's the definition of inappropriate. But he would, they would give us the wafer. We'd go up and take the wine and the wafer. And at the time, I don't know what it is these days, but it was those little discs. And Peter would lean over to me and say, "The styrofoam of heaven." And I would laugh. Yeah, so we had some good times in that church. And so Jean, my first memories, Jean was always part of my life because our parents were best friends along with the Hasbroucks and the Pickerings. And we always spent Thanksgiving together. And the Clarks sometimes would be with us as well. And it's such a fun memory. My favorite place to spend Thanksgiving, no offense to anybody else here, but was at the Doty's. I'm not sure why. Somehow their 70s house, that split level or something, seems so modern or something. My house was from 1903 and theirs seemed new or something. And the downstairs had the ping pong table, and we had a lot of good times there. And sometimes we'd even have a blizzard on Thanksgiving. But Jean was my godmother, and she was very dear to me. She was just always part of my life. She was always extremely kind to me. I think, I'm married twice in my life. My first marriage ended without children. We got divorced, and I didn't know that Jean had been married previously to being married to Stu, but she called me after I was going through what I was going through to tell me she had gone through that too. And I thought that was a very dear thing of her to do. So she came to visit me in Cape Elizabeth a few years ago with Peter. We went out and had a lovely dinner. She was suffering from some dementia at the time, so she didn't necessarily remember me, but we had a wonderful evening, despite that she didn't have a distinct recollection of who I was. But she remembered my mother and father, so she could remember further back in history. And that was a real treat, but we had such a fun evening, even though she didn't quite know who I was. And Peter was just 100% there supporting her the whole time and enjoying our evening together. We went out to a restaurant, then we went to the North Point in Portland, which is a great little bar, and we had a drink together. Drove back to their hotel, and it was so lovely to see her. Peter was so tickled that we spent the whole evening together with Jean. I remember very fondly going down to New Mexico and visiting your parents when they're both still alive, and having a wonderful time in Albuquerque. It was my first time there. They toured me all around, showed me the campus, and went to the petroglyphs, and really wonderful trip. But they were always extremely dear to me and my whole family. Peter spent a lot of time with my family. One summer, my father had a foundation out in Corinth, Maine, called the Skinner Settlement, which was a historical foundation and kind of recreated the 1800s and our general store. And Peter spent one summer with us out there, and boy, did he have a good time. He just was meant to be like an 1820s shopkeeper. He put on a period piece outfit, just loved it. I was wearing velvet, I don't know if that was totally appropriate for an 18th century. But he would make the brownies, and just like loved baking, right? And we always had fresh brownies down there. We did some fresh bread, some cookies. He loved Corinth, and he loved kind of the history of it, of being there, and acting like we were in the 1800s, because he was a performer. You know, he was a real actor, and he was a nonconformist. You know, Peter was a real nonconformist, going back to his young age, and certainly in high school, he really found his stride in nonconformity. Maybe angered quite a few teachers in his day. Certainly Roberta Fowler. How long? But yeah, I remember some of his creativity at a young age, and Dwight probably almost remembers it because he was a lot younger than us. But we would always put on a play, and the Pickerings will remember this. You know, we'd do a Thanksgiving play, and Peter would be the director. You know, so he's always giving us all the instructions of what we had to do. Dwight had a very minor role in one play, but he had the punchline, right? Because he was so young that he held up a grape, and Peter, being irreverent as he tended to be, he had Dwight say, "God is grape." So, and he always wanted
several small graphic roles. But I do remember it was always a big line.
Yeah, it's a big line.
Come in and say something like "Hark who goes there" or something. I was going to barge in and have a big line, but that was my only line.
Hey, but you were like, you stole the show because you were like, you were cute, go away, and that's perfect. And Peter gave you your debut with children. But he was so crafty. He'd always want to cut out. Remember, he made the pilgrim's hat and the turkey for each one of us, and would say John and Mary Sue and Jamie and David, and have all their names. And he was just so creative, and always with his dress code was, you know, very just all over the place, right? His whole life. And yeah, we continued our friendship, and I know that he spent some time with my parents a couple months in Orono as well. And so, and I remember his passion for photography, going to his show down in Northeast Harbor when he did, what do you call them? Were they like panoramas? Collages, right? You know, photo collages. So these great. I swear I remember that show like it was a couple summers ago. You know, but what was it? 30 years ago? You know, it's crazy. But I do remember going to that in Northeast, and he had all his collages out. I still have one of his photographs in my house of the blueberry barrens in fall. Beautiful. He was a great photographer. He really enjoyed it. It's a nice creative outlet for him. But what a kind soul. He was such a sweet man. Like Melanie said, he always called you on your birthday. Kim was just saying that, my sister Kim was just saying that to me, like, Peter always remembers my birthday. He always calls me. And he was so loving. He loved my parents. He loved my family. He was always so part of us. You know, he felt like an extra brother to me. And he loved being around us, and he laughed more than I could laugh. You know, just big, robust laugh. We had so much fun. Like, I remember being at Susie's house or Collins' house and all those dance parties we'd have. Christ, he was a good dancer. I really could shake a leg. And
all night long.
Yeah.
Like till 4 in the morning.
Yeah, it was crazy. You know, David remembers those parties. You know? Yeah, we were reminiscing about the Bellows house being the perfect house for those parties. It was just set back from the road. You know? They had some like soundproofing in there because all the crazy Bellow brothers were the But yeah.
So the police wouldn't show up so early to bust it out.
And I was lucky to be included because Kim, my older sister, was part of their gang, and they were always inclusive. They allowed me to come to the parties. But yeah, it really was a great shock because I loved him very much. So I was glad to speak with Melanie shortly after we commiserated together. And but he'll be fondly remembered because he is such a character. He'll always be with us. So thank you for all being here.
that was great, and I can't talk, I was too young really to get the funny stuff. I mean, I saw the funny stuff, but I was just too young to fully appreciate it. But I do know that Peter had a wicked sense of humor. I mean, it was,
So funny.
and so when I would run into him in later years, I could just sense his kind of a dry, sarcastic, but it was a very soft, it wasn't like a sharp sense of humor, it was a very soft, just in conversation, funny stuff that it probably lined up with my sense of humor, and I thought he was freaking hilarious. I mean, I just thought he was so funny, and, but it wasn't specific jokes that he made, but it was just like what Jamie said about at church, him saying the styrofoam was heaven, and at the end of the service today, I asked for the microphone and I told that, I go, if anybody needs a laugh, I just want to tell this story. It got a good laugh, but expectedly, I think only 75% of the people in the room really got it. 25 were like, I don't know what I think about that. Which is probably the story of Peter's life. I also just want to make a comment about Jean, who, when my parents moved here about 1965, became friends with the Wagners and the Clarks and the Dotys, and all of our parents really didn't have a local family here, so we kind of became family. And I don't even know if I realized it growing up how important it was, but having the Wagners and the Dotys and the Clarks and Pickerings and having them as part of kind of, it takes a village, obviously, but they were definitely our village, and my village. I always felt like I had family in town when I didn't have family in town, and I think, all my mom's relatives our family's in New York, and my dad's family was in Ohio, so we were definitely kind of stranded up here, but I never felt that way because of that bond that our parents had. And Jean was certainly a part of it, like with Jean and Jackie and Mary Sue. I think Jean was very quiet, I thought, like she had a very quiet way about her, but she was also just a perfectly balanced out stew, they kind of, and I think all of our dads were so different from each other, but they were the same in the fact they were all different from each other. But all the moms were just this core little group of really nice, solid, grounded people, and I felt like Jean was just that, and that was really a great thing that Jean reached out to you after when you were going through that stuff, because that just kind of seems like something that one of our moms would do for one of our kind of family members or whatever. So I just wanted to say that the Dotys in general were a very big part of me growing up. I wish I had known Peter better because, like I said, I was just too young to kind of be included in his group, but I totally get it. I think I totally understand how funny he was and how much and I will say the way you kind of described him is exactly how I would have expected him to actually be, even not having seen him a whole bunch, but he just was so loving, and it's so great to hear how he took care of Jean, so, but that was really special for me to hear that, because I get that. So, I just wanted to say the Dotys were so powerful and a big part of my life, and Jean was certainly that, and I just wanted to acknowledge that with everybody here, so thank you.
I'm Mary Sue Pickering, one half of the Pickerings that have been referred to. I cannot tell you how moving it is and what a treat it is to see so many of you whom I have known for so long. Some of you, at least one of you, before you were born. and one behind you. Peter called me in February to talk about having a service in June for his mother. So when our son David, who unfortunately is in Pittsburgh this weekend and couldn't be here, called to tell me that Peter had died, it was unbelievable. I couldn't put it together. It didn't seem right somehow because we've been talking about Jean. So it took a while for that to get integrated, I think, into my psyche and John's psyche. So that was our last contact with Peter. We had talked with him on the phone, seen him when he had come up with Jean. So many memories of Peter. And Melanie, you did such a wonderful job. It was wonderful. So I want to talk about Jean just for a moment. I learned a lot about Native Americans from Jean. From her own heritage, her commitment to genealogy, her understanding her life, and from her jewelry, her wonderful turquoise and silver necklaces, and the ceramics that she collected that I can still see up on the top shelf of the house in Albuquerque. John and I visited in Albuquerque 2 or 3 times, visited the Dotys. And I want to just give one little brief example of Jean's thoughtfulness. It's very small, but I think it reflects Jean. So on one of our trips to Albuquerque, and those of you who have flown from Orono to Albuquerque know it's not a smooth, easy thing to do. You have a lot of issues sometimes. So we got in rather late, and we hadn't really eaten, we'd had energy bars and water and tea and probably a glass of wine here and there. And Jean said, I have a bowl of tuna salad in the refrigerator, just in case you want something to eat. That has stayed with me for I don't know how many years because of the thoughtfulness of it. And also because I have a lot of dietary peculiarities, and for Jean to remember that tuna is one of the things that I can eat was really wonderful. And as I said, it seems small, but for me it was reflective of Jean. We miss the Dotys a lot. We miss the Wagners. We miss the Clarks. We miss the Hasbrooks. John and I are the remaining older generation of so many of you all. And we have such wonderful memories of the Thanksgivings, the Christmases, the weddings, the Easters, the dress-ups, the weirdness, the stories afterwards. It's nice to see so many people here. Thank you.
Mary Sue because the microphone is low where I needed to be. I'm like such an outlier. I was a reclusive teenager, and my parents, who know the Pickerings and knew the Wagners, we were never really part of that Orono culture, and we arrived late. I was in 8th grade when we came to Orono. And I always appreciated Peter, as everybody did, but like from a distance. And when I was about 21, my then boyfriend, now husband, and I was looking up over Parks Hardware, and I got a call one summer. Someone had told Peter Doty, ridiculously, that I had domestic skills. Which my husband thought was quite funny at the time too. I still don't. But he said that someone had said that I could mend some things for him. And so he showed up with a stack of sheets from the Astiku Inn that had holes in them. And a pair of ridiculous polyester navy blue and white check pants. And the funniest thing is that I said yes. And I found my Peter's stories, but that was such an intimate thing. And when Melanie said that he liked pampering, and then I heard that people responded to the styrofoam wafer with, I don't know what I think about that. That's kind of the way we were left with Peter when he left with the sheets. And I said to my husband the other day, do you even now know whether we were punked or not? He said, I don't know, but we just like quirky. And so I thank Peter for that, and that really, I will always hold that as a representative of Peter.
I really feel like we're all friends here, you know, I mean, we all know each other so well. I normally do not stand in front of people, but except for in the classroom. What I was thinking about, there's so many things to think about with Peter, but my name is Susanna Owen. I was Susie Bello. The Bello house was, the Bello mansion was where many of those fun parties occurred. And I was dancing a lot too, but I will never even in a million years try that now. Nice job, Melanie.
I'm okay.
And I did a lot of fun things with Peter. We worked at the Askew together. We often just spent a lot of time together going apple picking and various things, but we also fought a lot. And every single, we would try every year to go climb Mount Katahdin, and every single year we would get into a big fight. And I was kind of waiting for somebody to bring that up, that part. I can't be the only one that constantly got into fights with Peter. You did, I remember that. But we always got into fights, and what would happen is we would go, you know, stay at a campground the night before so we could have an early start, and then he would insist that we have eggs and bacon for breakfast before we climbed, you know, Katahdin. So we get there late, and then they wouldn't let us go into, you know, the place that we wanted to go, so then we would have to go all the way to the furthest away parking spot to, you know, the worst trail. And then of course he'd have to do Knife's Edge, so then we'd have to go up, and then we'd have to go across Knife's Edge and back again, and all. So and so we'd get into fights all the time. We'd have all kinds of fights about him having his expectations of how this was going to be done, and mine. And so they're always happening. But I think it was probably 1999. I went to visit him in San Francisco by myself, and he picked me up, and I think I don't know why. It doesn't really make sense. Maybe I got there at midnight or something. I don't know, because it wouldn't have made sense to do the overnight flight. But it was whatever it was. At 6 a.m., he had just got me, and he said, here's this fancy dress. You have to put this on. We're having the anniversary of the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco. So, you know, I'd only been there a few hours, and I was exhausted. He said, put this dress on, and it's like from 1906. And now we're going to be riding in this fire engine thing all through the town. And so then there's like a picture of us, you know, with the guy, you know, the handlebar mustache and everything. Peter's beautifully dressed, and I was exhausted. But the entire time I was visiting him, he had something planned. So we did the parade, and we were a part of the parade. And then we had to go to Alcatraz, and we had to, we met his friends who were very unusual, his eclectic friends, you know, at the reading room or something for drinks. And we had to go to the top of some hotel and have a particular type of drink that, you know.
The tiki room.
Yeah, the tiki room.
Yep.
Yeah, and so he had all these things, and I had such a blast. And I remember half falling asleep on the subway going from one place in the evening, and my head falling on his shoulder, and you know, and I realized we have gotten along so well. This has been fantastic, and that was when I realized that he was really, really made for being a host, and that was his forte. And then when he came and visited with his mom, a couple times I think I saw him, and I went, oh, that's the other thing. he is a caregiver. He's a host and a caregiver, and was so fantastic about it.
Deb.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Deb. Woo.
I'm Deb Leese. And as I'm sitting here hearing the stories, I want to make a comment about being raised in Orono and how lucky we were to have all of you and all your parents made us who we are. And I think there's a lot of quality in that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to break down, but it happens. It's amazing the parenting and the fairness. Like being at the parties, you guys are always so open to everything and all ideas. And we carry that with us throughout our entire lives. And we make a big difference, and you made a big difference on us. So that's about all I have to say about that. But I do want to relate a story about Peter. Susie and I and Peter went apple picking, and I had it in my head, and I could not let this go, that I wanted to make black bean soup with sweet potato wontons at Susie's house in Glenburn after apple picking. And we made a pie as well. And Peter, I knew he just thought that was a horrible idea. Because he kept saying, I have to go. And he kept like pretending to look at a watch that he didn't own. Saying, I have to leave. Yeah, I really have to get going. But he kept sticking around. And I'm like, he doesn't really think this is a bad idea. So I made these wontons and dressed up some soup, and I'm like, Peter, would you like some? And he's like, yeah, I don't know. And finally he did. And finally he ate 3 bowls of black bean wonton soup, which was pretty fantastic, I think. We had such a great time, but I always loved that about Peter, because he had it in his head that this was just the worst idea on earth, and then loved it. And I do remember being at the Doty's house, and he just had such admiration for your mom's ability to bake. And no one could hold a candle to that. So that was always really lovely. And Quinn and Peter and I spent a lot of time our senior year playing Cheat Clue in the Doty's basement. And Peter would always need to go and do something, like fix something for us to eat or whatever. And he'd say, so don't cheat. And we're like, no, Peter, we're not going to cheat. And of course we cheated. Every single time. So, we were sort of waiting for him to get on to the fact that we were always going to cheat. I feel really blessed to have been raised in Orono with these amazing people. And I think, it makes a big difference. There's so much unfairness now. People don't want to listen to other people. And I think Orono's really special because of that, and the connectedness. I've traveled in Europe, and I've seen people from Orono. So there's 6 degrees of separation, for sure. And it is family. Thanks, guys.
I'm John Pickering, the other half of the Pickering combo. And one of the things that I'm experiencing here is the inability to hear what almost all of you have said. My hearing is gone pretty much. But I have become quite adept at reading nonverbals. And let me tell you, this is one incredible community. just by watching how you emote and connect. And in a sense, it's like there was a message sent out from the center of Webb, the Doty family, saying, can you come? And we said, yes, we can. So we got here, and then we began to explore what was our place in that web. And it's not a one-dimensional web, it's a three-dimensional web, going in so many different directions. And Stu and Jean Doty were central to our web. David and Peter and Ted were central to our web, as were quite a number of you, because some of you don't know, I taught 6th grade in Orono. And I look around and I see those of you who I've had as students. You have become wonderful people. Just wonderful. So I want to thank you all for being who you are, showing who you are, and connecting in a way that we hope you appreciate how much your family means. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Quinn, and I didn't know what this was going to be like. Could have been vintage clothes and cold-ported music, or hippie clothes and I'll be smoking reefer. No way to tell. I didn't know I'd be coming up here and doing testimonials. So I met Peter when maybe 4th grade, and what I loved about him is all he cared about was being funny. I never met anybody like that. It's all he cared. Didn't care about sports, didn't care about music at that time, just being funny. So I loved him right away, and he had a good like Andy Kaufman style where you just didn't know. It's funnier that way. It's funnier if people think you're really stupid. And I still am stupid, so well, I mean, there's so many stories, but we were buddies for a long time, and everybody thought we were stupid, and we had a long time getting people to realize that we really were stupid. And then we made friends with all you all, and it's good to see you all again. You look terrible.
How do you?
All I remember, like a couple of stories. Everybody likes this one. This wasn't my proudest moment, by the way. But we were standing in line and Mr. Perry was saying something. So when he wasn't looking, I went, so he turned to look at me and said, what was that? Peter said, it was a raspberry. So, and then there was a punk rock concert, the Slaves of Liberty, and we all got suspended. And there's a lot of legends about that. People said he spit on people and yelled "fuck you" to the audience, and anyway, that we got suspended. But he didn't play an instrument. He just rode around on a tricycle, and he couldn't really perform. But he had the whole punk rock. He was very tuned to that whole punk rock scene, so he was just like a walking punk rock monster. And but he could play music. He could play piano, and I remember going to Viners. Sometimes we'd take it outside the school. We'd go to Viners, and he would play the music store. He'd play the piano. And then we got to know you. Na, na, na. He'd play the wrong note, and he'd keep playing. And finally, Sam Viner came out and goes, Oh, the clinkers. But we would stay up very late and do skits, and we would get punched. We would stay up to that sweet spot when it was like 1 in the morning, and you'd be punch drunk, and it would last about 20 minutes, but it was a lot of fun. And so we lost track of each other. We graduated, and he went off, and I saw him a couple of times in San Francisco, but he just wasn't this Peter I remember, and I wasn't either. And so we didn't really connect very much, and maybe that's good, because I remember the Peter I remember when we were kids, and hopefully he thought of me that way. But anyway, that's all I got to say. And I love Peter a lot.
Stand and be delivered!
Reach up.
You all that went to the parties in Sky Meadow remember that greeting. So, winter solstice in Sky Meadow in the freezing cold in the snow. And, Peter was almost always at all of them whenever he got back from San Francisco for the holidays to visit his folks and friends back here. And, those were always fun parties, even if you froze your ass off. So I remember in 1991, New Year's Eve, we were playing at the Penny Post. My sister, I'm Daryl Blease, by the way. I think most of you know me, but for those of you who don't. So Deb, Mel, Quinn, and myself had a band called In Your Face, and we played at the Penny Post in Old Town. And it's 1991, and Peter's there, and so is Sid Kling, also visiting from Los Angeles. And so our punk band, In Your Face, I think was kind of played some of the songs that Slaves of Liberty played, and when Quinn was in high school. And by the way, I'm a lot younger than those guys. So Dwight, I remember them coming into our house, and I was probably 9 or 10 years old, and the dance parties happened there too. So it was my parents' dining room as well, and it was a blast, man. It was a blast, and the dance and the this and doing the swim and all the. It was hilarious, especially when you're a little kid. So they were all older than me. I think 12 or 13 years older. From his graduating class, and then Mel is about 10 years older. But I'm 15 years old, playing at the Penny Post, playing drums, and Peter gets up on the stage at one point, and he's doing his dancing and everything, of course, the whole night. I mean, getting it started. He comes up at one point, and so it's New Year's Eve, so they had this, Ron, who ran the place, had this moon up behind the stage, and like trees, and he always made these cool stage sets. He had this moon that said 1991, and Peter gets up there and goes, "You know what I'm gonna miss most about 1991? It's a palindrome. It's the same thing forwards as it is backwards," like this. And so he's dancing, and these girls from Old Town, younger girls, I don't know, probably a little bit older than me, they're getting dancing too, right? And this is the night Peter starts calling me Teen Idol Daryl Blease, because these Old Town girls are screaming for the drummer, and Peter probably got them on that. He probably instigated that, but I felt like Ringo Starr back there, and it was Beatlemania or something. So that was a really fun night. At one point, Sid got up there and said, Three's company, but Doty is a crowd. And there were no truer words I've ever been spoken. So earlier that year, 1991, we went to see Peter at the theater down at the Bangor Mall. We went to see the Doors movie, and I was there with Susanna and Mel and Deb and Quinn, and I remember Susanna trying to convince my mom that, oh yeah, it's fine for a 15-year-old to go see this, even though there was tons of drugs and nudity and everything. But that was the thing about Orono, it was a little more permissive, and you had to become cultured somehow. So, and as soon as Peter's face, he had a big shot in the Doors movie of the San Francisco Summer of Love scene. And he went the extra length to put, he answered the call. They had these casting calls to get all these extras to come down. So he put, flowers in his beard and everything. And they were like, you look the most hippie of anyone. It's perfect. So he got a big close-up headshot. And so when his face came on the screen, we all pointed, Peter! Everyone else in the Bangor theater is probably like, what the hell? But, so, yeah, that was good fun. I was at the Celebration of Life in San Francisco a few weekends ago. I live out in the Bay Area, and I wasn't going to miss this either, but because it's so great to hear the stories from the people who knew him from back home, and to connect with all of you over this is pretty amazing. But so if you go onto the Memorial Facebook page, there's video. I put up a video of that, and you'll hear some pretty fun stories from his San Francisco days. One that I remember hearing, and I think hearing from Mel and Quinn, because they were in Berkeley for a couple of years, was, there were lots of antics. There was the Fantasia protest hoax thing. And so one I remember was he somehow commandeered the Muni, the SF Muni, public transportation. And so he didn't commandeer it, I guess. He was acting as a tour guide, somehow convinced the bus driver to let him be a tour guide. And he said, like you're driving around looking at celebrity homes in Los Angeles or something. Oh, the Transamerica Tower is a mooring anchor for a blimp, stuff like that. So anyway, yeah, there were a couple of times in the Bay Area. I was living down in Los Angeles at the time, and I went up for a couple of events. There was a Chet Helms memorial concert. For those who don't know, Chet Helms was a big promoter, a big music promoter in San Francisco in the 60s. And so he put on lots of events with like Jefferson Airplane, which was one of, if not Peter's favorite band, the Grateful Dead. And so Chet passed away in 2005. And so they threw a massive concert in Golden Gate Park, and all these musicians came out to play. And so Peter invited me up, so I flew up from Los Angeles and went to this concert with Peter, and it was one of the funnest days ever, even though it was a memorial concert. And I remember Michael McClure, who was still alive at the time, he was up on stage, and he reminded us, or reminded people who knew about Chet Helms. One of Chet Helms' things was, he's on stage saying this, don't be a gentleman, be a gentleman. And I remember Peter going, yes! And, I think that was Peter, very much. I think he was a class act. He remembered your birthday, he called on your birthday. I really think, he wasn't that stupid, Quinn. He really was an intellectual, I think. and he planned things to the T. And even if it was a total pain in the ass, he could get you to go and do it. He could get you to go along with this crazy idea. And I wrote this whole story. You can go look on the Facebook memorial page and read it. But one winter, I think it was '96, he's taking his photo collages, his winter photos of Gulf Haggis, which is a difficult hike in the summer. Out past Katahdin Iron Works, out old logging roads, and so I end up going with. I volunteer to go with him, and I think Deb is going, and her roommates are going. Peter's gone over to Deb's house to plan this trip, and I couldn't make it to the planning meeting, but so he calls me to brief me like the next day, like, okay, you're gonna need, put some screws through some sneakers for like ice cleats and and all this stuff, and we're cross country skiing into Gulf Haggis. So anyway, we get up at like 4 in the morning, and at this point I find out from Deb, like, no, we're not going. We think this is an awful idea, and it's about 20 below, or it feels like that. And Peter's like, we gotta stop in Old Town for donuts at this time. And we stop and get donuts. No, I want to go to this other place too, because I'm gonna do a donut coffee table book, all this stuff, and it's like, no, you gotta get going. We gotta hit the road, man. Like, we can't stop at every donut shop. I mean, retrospect, I would have been like, sure, we can stop for donuts. Oh, would you look at the time? I guess we don't have time to go freeze our asses off in Gulf Haggis. But anyway, we went and froze our asses off in Gulf Haggis, and you can read the longer story later, but the short story of it is, by the time we got to the gorge and the waterfall where he took his photos, it was 4 in the afternoon, and in January, it's starting to get dark. And so he gets his photos, and we hit the road, skiing back out, and that wasn't the end of the adventure. We come face to face with a moose, a big bull moose, and I've got a ski. We were stopped. We were stopped for a rest and a drink of water. We're dead tired. I mean, this whole thing was like 15 hours of skiing uphill both ways. I've got a ski between me and this big, like, snorted moose right in front of me. And Peter, he's like, what's that? And I'm like, it's a bull moose. And he's cleaning his glasses. And he starts yodeling. And the moose turns and runs off down the trail. And I'm like, what the hell was that? I was trying to do a moose mating call, throw my voice, and it worked. But like, at least it didn't try to mount Peter. At least could have been interesting. But so luckily it ran the opposite way of where we were headed, and we ski out. Finally we have a nice long downhill. We finally get out, and we see some headlights coming up the road. We still had to, we had a little ways to go to get back up the road to Peter's car. We went out a different way. We found a nice, well-lit, it was a logging road, but they didn't maintain it, so it was like snowmobile. Snowmobiles had packed it down. It was a nice moonlit night, so we could actually see. So we figured out, by looking at the map, we could get out this easier way. And but then we got out to the road we were parked on. It's like, we've got to go a couple of miles more, and we see some headlights coming up through the trees, and lo and behold, it's the Maine Fish and Game Warden. And my sister Deb had figured, well, they're well past when they said they'd be back, so she called the state police, I guess, and they contacted the Warden Service. And we made it out of there alive and went and had Pat's Pizza. And then Peter bought my mom a dozen roses the next day. He felt so awful, and wrote a handwritten note, thank you note, and or a sorry note, I guess. And then a few months later, I get a copy of Down East magazine, and there are the photos from Gulf Haggis, and he had a handwritten note to me, and it teen idol. So that was back to the penny post gig. He started calling me teen idol Daryl Blees from that point on, because of these screaming girls from Old Town. So from that point on to Peter Doty, I was teen idol Daryl Blees. So yeah, I think that says a lot about Peter. Even though that was a complete hassle, but he took the time, the care to send you a copy of the magazine and send a handwritten note and do those sorts of things. So, I think that's Peter in a nutshell. But anyway, it's nice to share that with all of you.
I'm going to sort of arbitrarily say that's all, folks. I'd just like to urge you to go out to the memorial page on Facebook. Those of you that are there, you will find, like I said before, videos of the first two things we have. You'll find dozens, if not hundreds, of pictures. You'll find more Peter stories. You'll find some things about my mom too. And I want to echo what a couple of people said. I think that it was a great gift for me to grow up in Orono and to grow up with the family of choice that we all put together here. My parents came here. My dad's parents by that time had passed on, and my mom's family all lived in California. So, I saw them twice a decade, whether I needed to or not. But we had such a close group here, and it has meant so much for me. It has made me the person that I am, and I am appreciative that so many of you were part of that, and that we continue to be a community like that. There were almost no strangers here today for me. It was just friends that I hadn't seen in a long time, and maybe some new friends that I hadn't met yet. That has been so much to me. The other thing I'd just like to point out is if you want to see some of those skits that Peter and Quinn put together, there are videos on that Facebook page. I haven't had a chance to watch them all because I've been busy with Peter's estate and all, but the one that I started watching was Peter having won the Guinness Book of World Record worst hangover ever. With this big ice bag on his, and he's going around like this, and Quinn's interviewing him as if he was some big celebrity. It is really funny. And is indicative of Peter. I think a performance artist really describes him well, in addition to being a gentleman. And I'm so appreciative that I had my mom for a mom, and Peter for my brother, and all of you as part of that. Thank you so much. And now we can all have some chocolate.
Yeah, a lot of people say that. Yeah.
It is.